Hello everyone and welcome to I think episode 29 of the Pro webinar, and we are going to be getting clear on your business brand. Benjamin Catley-Richardson, our guest, who's up in the pink room, is going to be talking us through what brand is and basically how we can get our business to be noticed and remembered, and how people can help sort of choose us from the plethora of other companies that are out there. So I just want to jump in because I've known Ben for a long time, and whenever we get talking, we get talking. So I want to use this hour to its fullest. So Ben, do you want to say hello and just introduce your company, who you are?
Yeah, hi. So I'm Benjamin. I'm the Strategic Director for BrandClear. I've been with BrandClear for just over a year. I landed literally 3 or 4 weeks before lockdown happened. And we were just joking, actually, at my last sort of induction conversation on joining the business. We were doing the elbow shaking hands and going, oh, this is crazy. I wonder if it'll affect the live events we've got planned for the rest of the year. And of course, everything fell over. What we do basically is perform the reconnaissance and the battle planning that you need as a business to successfully engage with the enemy, to engage with the market. So we go out and we find out all the information about your market, your competition, where the opportunities are. Then we work with you to put that into a strategy and to build a forward-looking approach to where you're going to go and how you're going to win in what you do. And then we hand over with a series of tools that we'll talk about in a minute as well, and basically a guideline, a sort of brand Bible that enables you to self-manage the brand. So actually you don't need anybody else from that point on, or you can more effectively brief agencies and things so you can stay consistent. So it's really about that first stage before you say anything, before you start going out. It's about getting a clear brand, because, I mean, we really do believe that a clear brand makes everything else easier, from decisions to marketing to whatever. So. Absolutely.
I mean, I find that when I'm working with a company who knows how they're going to be perceived by the audience, or how they are actually perceived by the audience, they know what they're trying to do in the world. They have a very clear vision of all of that. It makes my job so much easier.
Definitely.
And so it's always nice. I mean, I understand a brand, but I don't live it. And so it's really good to have you on to talk. I know we talk all the time about various different things, but usually can be anything. I mean, I think I met you when I was working back with Faster when we were starting a scheme many years ago now. And I remember us talking on, was it the plane or the train somewhere?
Everywhere, really. I mean, we talked about Myers-Briggs for a while. We talked about my obsession with the Bakhtiari tribe, and Jacob Bronowski and his series, The Ascent of Man, just anything, really.
I think it was anything, and it was a joke that we were just always chatting constantly all the time. So we'll try and keep it to 1 hour. Yeah. But I think brand is certainly really important, and I want to dive into more about what it is, and for my own benefit and for the listeners and members of the club, because it is so key, and it helps. It really does help everything else. Just before we get onto that, hello from me. I'm Ben, and you all know me. Well, I've worked with loads of businesses over the last 11 years, something like that. It fades into the distant past. About 500 businesses, actually a lot of those through Fastershire. So that's working with some really interesting businesses in and around Herefordshire and Gloucestershire. I cover marketing strategy, web development, video, data analysis. I actually like getting involved in lots of different things. Now, importantly, I must mention this. This is number 29 of the webinars. We've been doing this, for almost 2.5 years now, which I can't believe. So there's lots of previous webinars on loads of different subjects. Some are interviews like this. Some are me taking a walkthrough of WordPress, Google Analytics, all that sort of stuff. So if you're interested in a certain topic, do have a dig through there. If you're not sure, just send me an email, and I'll find the relevant stuff for you. And if it's not there, let me know, and we'll plan it into the schedule. Okay, enough about me. Let's get started. I've got lots of questions, but really, let's start at the beginning. What is a brand?
Well, I mean, I said that a clear brand is supposed to make everything else easier, and I think ultimately the idea of brand has become so kind of corrupted or misunderstood And one of the things when I joined Brandclear last year that I could see that there was a problem, especially when all the live events went out the window and you're having to do much more remotely and do much more cold outreach, is people's perception is that brand is a logo. It's, well, on the one hand, it's either a logo, a color, a character, you know, it's Tony the Tiger, or it's the thing that big companies like L'Oreal do that is just completely inaccessible to real companies, as I like to say. You know, like what was it Andy Corbett used to say, like 95% of all the companies in the country are small or medium-sized enterprises. So these big businesses that are running brands, that are spending millions of dollars on advertising every year to be on brand, that's what we think of when we think of brand. And we don't think about it for, you know, I'm speaking next week to a company that makes valves. And why would a company that makes valves need a brand? You know, they've got a logo. Why would a plumber need a brand? Why would ultimately, if you think about where the idea of a brand came from, it's just familiarity. It's recognizability. It's so you can, you know, so a farmer could go, those are mine and those are yours. And ultimately, it's about that familiarity with a company, so you know who to trust, you know what to expect. And, you know, we talk about easiness. It's because it's easier to spot somebody if they've got a brand. And I was talking just before we came on that when I used to want to be an author, and I was obsessed with this idea. I've been a video games journalist, I've been a writer, I've been all that kind of stuff. And all that time I was trying to find a voice. And when you're trying to be a writer, you can be really down this rabbit hole of voice, because everybody tells you you need one, you've got to find one, you've got to do this, that, and the other. Oh, you know, this author has this voice, you know, J.K. Rowling has this particular, but what is it? And it's like brand. It's exactly the same kind of thing. The voice is really what you stand for, your perspective on things, your take on something, the filter that you pass the world through and then make sense of it. And so with a writer using a voice, it's not about the fact they use these kind of adjectives or they use these long words or these long sentences. It's about the fact that they see the world in a particular way, and therefore their writing reflects that perception of the world that they have. And brand is exactly the same. You have a business that looks at the world in a particular way, like Apple. I mean, it's a cliched example, but it's very easy. We'll get onto some more maybe interesting ones later. But Apple's a great example because they look at the world, they see the world in a particular way, and that way directs their products, directs their prices, directs how they promote themselves, and directs the places that they send people to. So the Apple Store is as much a definition of their brand as the iPhone that you take out of your pocket, and as the Apple. You know, it's not just the icon, it's everything that passes through.
And it's interesting. I'm some might call an Apple fanboy, and I listen to a lot of Apple podcasts. And the Apple brand comes out in that, in so much so that people can predict how Apple are going to behave, because they are always following their brand. They have an identity and they stick to it. For better or for worse, but generally, you know, you know what they're going to do. You know maybe the name of the product, or you know the product they're going to put out there, or the type of marketing, because that's who they are. They live and breathe that all the time.
And it is identity. It's the idea of, as a company, you can be confident and go out and say something and release something and do something and know that it fits within that identity. It's interesting, actually. Look at Porsche. So Porsche are known as, you know, this incredible, well-designed, you know, height of supercar sort of brand. And you go to their museum in Stuttgart, and it's about this heritage that they've got, and it's this incredible brand that they've established. And then people were shocked when they released an SUV recently. And the interesting thing about how brand plays is they took a risk there that the brand, you know, their 911, which is essentially to some degree unchanged in design from the beginning of time when it existed, they released this SUV which did undermine their brand in some ways to being just another car company.
Yeah.
And yet the funny thing is that they've done it so well, and they've maintained the design across those SUVs and their new lines, that actually the SUVs and those kind of, you know, normal cars support their ability to continue their brand doing these incredible cars. And, you know, it does work in that way. And like Ferrari will not allow you to buy a brand new Ferrari unless you've proven your adherence to the brand. Really? And so they, you know, they work with it that way. You know, you've got to show that you've owned Ferraris in the past. You can't, I can't remember who it was, but Gordon Ramsay had applied for a one of the new special edition Ferraris and got in. And then this very famous designer from America who'd had several of them, including special editions, hadn't got in. And so their brand is obviously built around this elitism, this sort of who has one and who hasn't, and who's allowed in the club and who isn't. Whereas you look at Tesla, I think is a really interesting way of looking at a brand. I was in a queue the other day, and a Tesla car came past. That it was only when it had gone past that I realized A, it was a Tesla, and B, it was an undercover cop car, police car.
All right.
And I thought the thing about Tesla that they've done so well is you've got the brand, which is, you know, Elon Musk being this incredible ostentatious character who goes on Saturday Night Live and, you know, raises the price of cryptocurrency. But their cars are actually so invisible that you can use them as a regular saloon car to fit into the normal motorway traffic as an undercover police car. And you just don't, you have to look quite hard. They almost look like a nicer looking Mondeo. You know, they're not particularly.
But I bet the people who have Teslas know instantly. They know they're part of that club.
Yeah, they do. And they know they're part of that club. But the thing I thought was interesting is that the experience of driving it is different because you've got the big screen, you've got some of the windows, that, you know, the doors that come up like a DeLorean. Obviously, it's electric. You've got that experience of driving it. From the outside, you don't see that. So the ostentatiousness isn't part of their brand. And I thought that the amazing thing about that is that what they've managed to do is embed a car model as a normalized part of the road that is actually an abnormal outlier. So there are, you know, such a small number of electric cars running out there, but many, many people won't be able to pick a Tesla, pick an electric car out of the run-up of, you know, if you showed them a whole load of saloon cars. So electric cars, by the very nature of Tesla's brand, are becoming normalized, which is great for them. And you were talking about for better or worse, you know, ultimately, and this is where we come in really, is that your brand has to have a strategy at the base of it. So Tesla's strategy, I believe, is not so much about revolutionizing cars and, you know, kind of changing the technology that people use. It's about making buying an electric car as straightforward, as easy, and as normal as buying a petrol car. And that obviously is going to do them wonders and has done.
You've got on your website, you try and define brand.
Yeah.
Try and make it simple because a lot of people do struggle. This isn't a quote exactly, I'm paraphrasing, but you say the business is a planet. So your business is the actual planet. The brand is the surface of that planet. It's what people can see. They don't see what's going on under the covers and the interplay between HR, personnel, IT systems, how your production. They don't see any of that. All they see is what's on the surface. So,
well, they see the atmosphere, don't they? They see.
Yeah, well, that's what's coming to that. So what I really like is then you say the marketing is the atmosphere.
Yeah.
So they see the surface, but actually how you then present it to people who are looking from outer space at this planet is the marketing. And so the marketing is how clearly you can represent the surface of the planet, the brand, to people looking at it. And I think that actually is quite clear to me, to think of your business as the planet, the brand as a surface, and then the atmosphere to space is the marketing, how you present that to other people.
Well, I think it's interesting you'd say that because, as I say, I joined about 12 months ago. And one of the first things I did was really say to Brand Clear, to us, why we should be brand clearing Brand Clear, because everything's changed. You know, the pandemic's come in and we can't get to the normal channels of people. Our audience, our perfect clients are really in the medium end of the SME market, and getting a hold of those business leaders is just getting harder and harder and harder, obviously with the change to events and everything like that. And so one of the things I've done for 12 months is basically go through that process, because it's so hard when you're inside the brand to really, as a business, to take that outsider's perspective and get an idea on it. And one of the things that's interesting about that Planet one is that I've been looking at it and thinking, Now, I know now, after 12 months of work, that Brand Clear is about making things easy. It's about making everything easier, because my belief is that your marketing, the only function of your marketing really, is to make things easier for the rest of the business. Yep. So it should be making your sales easier. Yeah, it should be making meetings like this easier, you know, to come on and interview someone. You should be able to know what to interview them about. And if you're interviewed, to know what to talk about. You know, basically your marketing should be the thing that makes it easier to do business. And I've been looking at that Planet thing and thinking, actually, is it a bit too convoluted? You know, we need to make things easier. But it's interesting you say that. Maybe all it needs is a good analogy, and, you know, metaphors help make things easier. Maybe it just needs a bit of tweaking just to get that message across. Because, yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think the idea of brand is that your brand should sit within your marketing. Your brand is a part of your marketing. But your brand is really how you link the business objectives you have, the business that you actually run, and the marketing that you want to put out there. And it's it's the bridge between those two things. And so brand ultimately can't be about short-term fixes. It can't be about short-term sales. It can't be about tactics and, you know, this is happening on LinkedIn and YouTube is doing this. And what about the Google algorithm? It can't be anything to do with that. It has to be much more about the business, what you're trying to achieve as a business, what you want that business to be known for. And then it moves into the marketing in that way. And the marketing then takes your brand out into the marketplace and expresses all those things together. So yeah, it is that kind of atmosphere between the deep space of the market and the planet, and then yeah, your atmosphere of the market.
I think it works really well. There's something else another way of looking at brand that I heard, not on your website, but I've heard elsewhere, is to say that a brand isn't what you say it is.
Yeah.
It's what your customers say it is.
Yeah.
As in, your actual brand is not something you can control per se. It's how people talk about you to other people. So if we're talking about Apple, for example, the brand is how we feel about them, how we show that to other people, how we talk about that to other people. Apple can influence that by what they do, but they can't control that exactly to some degree. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, you can't really be in marketing for very long, certainly not at the moment, and think that the most important thing in any marketing plan is the customer profile. I won't say persona, because I agree with a guy who you should all look up called Louis Grenier, who is really, really good in this kind of area. And he talks about, you know, customer personas should die a terrible death, because ultimately you're reducing something down to something that doesn't tell you anything, you know.
I agree when you just boil it down to a few pithy comments.
When you take 30 to 40-year-olds, you know, it's like another guy, Mark Ritson, you know, likes to pull out millennials as sort of one of these things that you can tell that people are talking, you know, talking bullshit, basically, which is anybody who tells you, oh, millennials are this, millennials are that. You know, there are millions of these people that were born in this period of time, and they are all different from one another. What you're looking for, and where brand fits into it as well, and what you're saying is, what you're looking for is the psychographics, the psychographic profiles. What are their pains? What do people lie awake at night trying to do? So for us, for instance, it was that realization going all the way through the last 12 months and going, you know what? People just want their businesses to be easier to run. They don't want to get up in the morning and think, oh God, I'm going back to work. I have no idea how to make this decision. I have no idea how to decide, you know, what way we're going to go with the brand. I have no idea to know how our marketing is successful or not. That's what brand does. That's what brand does, is make things easier to understand and easier to decide upon and easier to go out and do. And so as soon as I got there, I was like, okay, I've got this psychographic idea of my perfect client. And ultimately, the important part of that is understanding how they feel, the empathy to know your audience, to know what their reaction will be to you. And I completely agree that ultimately your brand is a construct of perception. So it's what people think of you. But the interesting thing is that doesn't make you powerless. It doesn't make you passive. It's like you walk into a room, you know, if you walk into a room at a party, shout really loudly, slag off the music, throw drinks around, you've made a conscious decision to be a douchebag. And people's perception of you is going to be, that's a douchebag, you know.
Yeah.
And that's how brand works. It's nothing that, it's something that you can control, but ultimately you can only kind of nudge people in the right direction. You know, in
That's
the end,
right, yes.
In the end, they're going to have a perception of you that's going to be more to do with them than it is to do with you. But I'll give another example of a brand I really, really like, is called Mag Tools. Now, Mag Tools aren't a tools supplier or a seller. What they basically do as a business is manage franchises. Mm-hmm. So there's a van just up the road from me, Mag Tools van, drives around, you know, yeah, it sells tools, it distributes tools, it's up at the garage up the road. But on the back, you see the real marketing message that Mag Tools works from, and it just says, be your own boss. So this van drives around the area with be your own boss on the back of it. And the reason it's there, and we'll talk about this in a minute, actually, we'll talk about the customer journey, is because really brand in its sort of essence is making a promise to somebody. And so what Mag Tools have realized very, very cleverly is that they don't need to get people who want to sell tools, because that's the franchise model. They give them the distribution network, they, you know, establish them as a franchisor, and then they go out and sell the tools. They're not looking for people who want to sell tools or people who want to be retailers or franchisers, whatever. What they're doing is looking for people who want to be their own boss. And there are people walking around every day who just are waiting for someone to tell them, you can be your own boss. You can do it. And
oh, I know. I see lots of YouTube ads saying that.
Yeah. And it's that element of, as a brand, you make a promise. Your brand is the promise that you make. So our promise is we make everything else easier. We make it easier to do business. That's our promise. And it doesn't actually use the word brand. It doesn't use any word marketing, because that also has connotations that we don't want to get into. Just like Mag Tools, yeah, it's in their name, but you don't see that. You see this statement. They don't tell you how you're going to be your own boss. They don't tell you what you'll be doing. They don't tell you it's anything to do with selling or tools or whatever. They just tell you something you want to hear. And then, like you said, the perception then is that people see Mag Tools as an enabler, as someone who can give them freedom, as a company that understands them. Now, there are many, many people who will just drive past it and never think about it. But Mag Tools doesn't care. And as a brand, you shouldn't care. You can't please all the people all the time. And if you try to do that, you're going to fail. So when you look at how things work in the real world, there are people out there that want a promise that you can deliver. And if you tell them that, they will love you for it, and then the perception of your brand will be raised up. I mean, if you just go through a couple of slides, actually, Ben, and we have a look at.
Before we do, I just want to say welcome to everyone. I completely forgot to say hello to everyone watching live. Feel free to jump in with any questions if anything that comes up while Ben's talking, or just pop it in the chat and let me know, or we might have time at the end for questions. But like most of my webinars, I doubt it, so I'd get them in early.
Certainly not.
Right, let's go.
So
is this one first?
If you keep going to the third one, so I've given them to you backwards. But basically, this is what we call the brand anchor, or the message anchor. At the end of all of our projects with clients, we give them, as I was saying, I think at the beginning, a toolkit, a sort of Bible that enables you to run this in the future. And so what you have is, this is why I've been talking about making life easier, because that's our purpose as a business. You get down to the very, very bottom level, and the emotional benefit that you actually give to people. Because what's been shown is that especially when you're brand building, so when you're doing brand penetration, the only real thing that makes an impact is emotional appeals. So you've got to find a way that your company helps people relieve something or gain something or reach something that is an emotional benefit. So I was speaking to an IT company the other day, and we were trying to get, it's IT, it's technical, it's, they've got all these rational reasons to choose them. But ultimately we landed upon the fact that actually an IT support company ironically enables a company to be more independent. Because even though it's using an outsourced company to do its IT, it means that it can then focus on all of the other stuff that it does really, really well.
Yeah.
And it can focus on being independent in the way that matters to it. So that IT company could then go out and start making these statements, these promises, you know, to be more independent, be a business owner with more independence, because you're not caught up in all of the organizing this and managing the IT group and all that kind of stuff. So you've got to find your promise, which is the essence of your brand, that has an emotional resonance to it with the people that you want to work with. So again,
so on your triangle here, that's is that the practical difference? The bit
no,
that's
that's the why. The why you do it. The why you do it. Your purpose. Why are you doing this and not selling ice cream? You know, why are you doing this podcast and not just anything else? And it's because
I love it. That's why.
Because you love it, but you love it because you're sharing knowledge and you're helping people to advance their own knowledge in a way that is independence. Again, it's that idea of independence and the ability to drive your own destiny and take control over what you do. You know, if you can find these emotional appeals to people, you're finding your brand essence. So our brand essence as Brand Clear is that basically, you know, a clear brand makes life easier. It makes everything else easier if you've got this clarity in your brand. And then the question then is when you go out to people and you talk to people about that, is like with Mag Tools, you've got to have a way to deliver upon that, because nobody hates something more than a broken promise. You know, if you promise I can make your life easier and then you make it harder, they're gonna go out of their way to complain about you.
That's right. And also the other question they might ask themselves is, so what does that mean to me?
Yes.
Yes, you're into that, but how does that affect me? How does that impact me?
Yeah, and ultimately, if Mag Tools make the promise, be your own boss, you've got to be able to show how that works and that that's a truthful promise. And that's when it comes into the value, what you do, what's your value, and what's the sort of the actual boiled down purpose beyond the emotional reasons that we're talking about, the boiled down reason that your business exists. What does it actually deliver? So for us, it's clarity. You know, direction is sort of part of that. And that follows on from the promise you've made. So we make everything easier. How do you do that? Well, we make everything clearer. So we give you clarity, and clarity makes everything easier. It makes it easier for you, for your staff, for your clients, everything. So you've got to have this interchange of your brand promise and then your business kind of value. And so with Mag Tools, obviously, it's, you know, we be your own boss. I can make that promise to you because I know that when you come to me, I can say, look, because you run as a franchiser, you run your own operation, we're not on your back, You know, we give you that independence, that, you know, self-autonomy to go and run your own business. You just have to do it through us. But other than that, you're your own boss. So we've delivered on that promise. So those two things are really like the early stages of the relationship. And then what matters to people, this thing down at the bottom, for us is a practical difference or control, or, you know, it's these kind of things of basically that you don't get a consultant that comes in, has a big long 24-page report and says, this is your brand narrative, this is your brand story, you know, oh God. And then they walk away and you're left with this stuff that means nothing to you, that your marketing teams can do nothing with, that your sales teams, if they open their mouth and use the stuff that's in these consultant reports to their customers, the customers are just rolling their eyes, you know, and walking away from you. The idea of Brand Clear is that you go through this process, and at the end of it, you have a Bible. You have a way to self-manage your brand into the future. And that's the practical difference, that everything you do as Brand Clear, with Brand Clear, gets you onto a roadmap that takes you forward as a brand, and that you can do that yourself. So that's why we give these tools at the end of it to help people to look at it. Because, and this is where it comes down to it, I've come into this interview and I've got this triangle, and this tells me what to talk about. Yeah. So just any question you give me, any conversation we have, any topic we touch on, I know as a business owner, as someone representing the business, that if I talk about these three things and sort of interface them, I'm staying on brand. I'm giving the best message of my brand. And it's the same for any business. And actually, we did I did one of these exercises with a gym business who had to completely change, obviously, with the pandemic. gone completely digital in terms of helping people from a distance, and doing sort of set gym routines at home and all this kind of stuff. And they were going to have a whole series of radio interviews. And he was just like, I don't know. I've got all this data. I don't know what to talk about. I've got all this information. I've got these anecdotes. What do I do? What do I do? So we sat down with this tool and we worked through what we'd been through with the brand clear process. And we identified, taking out of all the bits and pieces, this is your purpose, this is your value, these are your audience and what matters. And then we came up with some statements that came along with these themes. And he's had that, this was last July, I think I did it with him. He's had that diagram pinned up to his board since then, because he can't do without it now. Because if he gets a phone call from someone that he wants to talk about, training shared about, he just looks at the diagram and he knows what to talk about. And really that's what our tools do, is enable you to be consistent and to self-manage the brand by doing something really simple. I mean, I can talk for hours about this subject, obviously, but when I was a video games journalist, I landed on magazine, official PlayStation magazine. I've been there sort of 5 days doing my inductions, something like that. And they gave me what they called a brand eye, which was a big circle with another big circle around it and then 4 quadrants. Mm-hmm. And this diagram was full of probably 30 or 40 phrases or statements that represented the audience, how we talked to them, what they wanted. And I looked at it as like just out of university, first job, really excited about doing the job. But I looked at it and I was like, I don't know how to write to this. I don't know how to develop a voice around this. I can pick things out and I can kind of understand this, but this seems to not necessarily go with that. Or if I'm writing a 500-word review or a 250-word review, am I supposed to get all of these words in there? Because if then every review is going to read the same. And so this triangle for me has been a development of that idea of, if somebody starts at a business and you sit them at a desk, say it's a salesperson, they start their first day at the desk, they're going to be looking at everybody else in the office and trying to learn how they talk about the business. They're going to be listening to their managers and their leaders and the CEO, whatever like that. How do they talk about the business? What's the things that they say? What comparisons do they make? When we talk about buying our sales, our service, our product, what reasons do they give? And they're going to be sat there trying to drink all this in. And we know from most businesses that everybody's got their own way of doing it, and that everybody's talking about different anecdotes and different stats and different examples. And so as a newbie, you're sat there and you're going, it's going to take me 6 months just to get into the swing of this. Whereas I know, not to blow our own trumpets, but I know that if I'd landed on that magazine and someone had handed me a piece of paper with these 3 things on it and said, this leads into this is because of that, and that matters to people, I could have gone away and said, okay, I have a structure now that's simple enough that I can do my own thing within that structure, but definitive enough that when I talk to people about why I've made decisions, we can tell whether it fits or not. And people can edit my work telling me, no, that doesn't fit with this and that doesn't fit with that. And again, this is that whole thing about brand, is the reason that this is important and the reason that this diagram has been so useful to people is because it's about consistency. Mm-hmm. And to get into cold, hard sort of stats in a way, there's a Lucid Press study, and it was kind of anecdotal. It was asking people their experiences of things, but it was basically showing that if you can make your brand consistent everywhere you do it, so from the first advert that someone sees, to the pitch conversation that they have, to the sales call that they get, to the onboarding materials, so on and so forth. If you can make it consistent all the way along, you can drive up your revenue by 33%. And
I would agree. Consistency is so important. It's not about the logo, the color, anything else. Consistency trumps everything, really, because that's what builds trust, because you do what you say.
Yeah, and ultimately, just as your brand promise is the essence of your brand, the fact that promise can be trusted is the real reason that it's worth having a brand in the first place. Because if nobody else out there is making a promise that you are making, and actually most businesses don't make emotional appeals, they do features and factual, rational reasons to choose. And it's really hard for people to make those decisions. Mm-hmm. So if you go out there and you make a really easily understood, emotionally driven promise, people will recognize that that's an easy thing to do, to make that decision. And if you can then prove in those first bits of contact with them that you can deliver on the promise, you've already won an element of trust, because you've already demonstrated that you can be trusted to deliver on your promises. And you can't really do that in terms of features and rational reasons and stuff like that. You can't get into people's kind of needs as deeply as if you're doing a, think about dating at the moment, right? At the moment, online dating is having a real resurgence, obviously because people couldn't go out and meet people. If you go out into the world now, and we can go into bars and stuff like that, you go into a bar and you realize that there's a problem at the moment, which is that you don't have to do online dating now because you can go out to a bar. But how are you going to meet people? You've got to wear a mask when you move anywhere, when you stood up. So it's not a great confidence thing, is it? You can't even talk particularly well through it. So you've got to wear a mask. The idea of approaching somebody else's table is now completely verboten, because you can't mix, you can't just walk up to people. So that's, kind of out of the way. And you're never going to be up at the bar. You're never going to cross paths with people in a way that, creates this opportunity for interaction. So someone's walking around surely now going, there's a problem there. And that's where all good business ideas should come from, is a problem. And you say there's a problem with dating, with the way people are able to meet people out in the world. How can I make that easier? And as much as I believe that marketing should make a business easier, really I believe that a business should make somebody's life easier. That's how you have success, really.
Frictionless is a term I hear a lot.
Exactly.
Because you can always look to make something easier, even if someone has what's considered the perfect solution. You say, well, how can we make that more frictionless? So we can make it, electronic payment has made buying things much more frictionless. In fact, parking. So having to take coins with you to go and park.
Exactly.
That was such a pain.
Well,
you never know how much you need.
Exactly.
Now you can pay electronically just by waving your phone in front, or actually just doing it on the app. You can do it as you're walking away. You can do it in the coffee shop. You can top it up. You've actually taken something which I resented doing, paying money, or a couple of pounds. You resent doing that because it's awkward, into some things like, this is easy. I'm more than happy to do it. And actually it takes away the friction, makes it easier, and actually makes it a pleasurable experience. So you're going to want to do it. And they charge you more. And you don't mind.
You don't mind. And that's where the promise comes into it, really, is that you're making a service promise, which is that you don't have to carry cash anymore. You don't have to worry about the individual coins. You're not going to have to worry if it's going to swallow you're taking all that away. And then because you can actually deliver on it well, you're golden. The difficulty is things like when you're managing a brand, you have to be really careful about that promise, like I said, because, for instance, I've started using Loom. I don't know whether you've heard of it, which is a piece of software, browser-based software. You go on, you talk to camera, you can record your tabs.
I used it the other day, in fact, for a proposal.
And it's great. I use it for outreach because I can talk to a prospective client and I can have their website up, which immediately shows that I'm taking an interest in what they do, and I can scroll through it and talk through it. And, it's a mix of my face and their stuff, which is
it's a bit of screen recording software which wraps everything up, so you can copy and paste the video into an email. And it just takes care of it makes it frictionless, doesn't it? It makes it super easy to do.
That's the problem. It should make it frictionless. But once you start playing with it, and I've been using it for a few months now, you just get into these things where it won't load sometimes. And when you're trying to trim a video because you made a mistake at the end, or actually most of the time, because it's really difficult to end the video, right? So there are these little problems that they've got that actually the culmination of them, I'm now like, you know what? It's not making my life any easier. Even though it probably is, because there's not an alternative. I'm starting to feel betrayed by it because it's not delivering on the promise. The promise was one platform, one easy 2-camera presentation, one easy process of sending a video. That was the promise. And now it's not being delivered. And I'm becoming more dissatisfied because the promise isn't being delivered than I would have been if I just accidentally found it and just
that's
kind of
really interesting. So it's that they're over promising. So they've got a great. I've only used it a few times now. Another one I used was Bomb, very similar, and it seems fine. I haven't reached the depth that you have, perhaps. but it seems that they're obviously, even though it might be making the process easier, they're over-promising, and you're looking at them now negatively, because even though what they're doing is helpful, it's not as helpful as they're promising.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, if we go back one slide, actually, so if you go back to the to this slide, so this is another tool that we give people, which is basically, it kind of overlaps, and all of our tools overlap because the best tools do. They just give you different perspectives on what you're trying to do. So this obviously still hooks into that idea of your why, your what, and what matters to people. But it's trying to give you a demonstration of how you can employ that in a customer relationship. So we talked about making a promise, making people aware of you. That's the best way to deliver brand penetration, is to make that promise, to make that emotional appeal to people, because you understand their pains. So like with the dating example, I was saying, someone's going around saying there must be a way to solve this. If they could solve it, the promise that they have would be directly in line with this pain that people are suffering now of we're out and about in the world, but we still can't talk. We still can't cross paths with people. So you come up with a promise that it captures that pain. You make that promise because you were talking about the way in which people are like, what's in it for me? Because at that beginning bit, the customer focus is, why should I care? So this is why brand's really important, because brand essentially starts to answer the question, why should I care? Because if your brand positioning and your brand message and essence, all these kind of things together, if they're right, then people can't help but care about you. The right people can't help but care about you. So like with mag tools, to go back to them, people who really want to be their own boss, they're drawn to mag tools. So they start asking questions of mag tools. And any sales guru will tell you that someone who's asking questions is someone who's buying. So the goal is to appeal to them and their sort of self-obsessed kind of way of, I've got this pain, and you go to them and say, I can promise to take it away, because it draws them out of themselves. And then they move to the next bit, which is this interest part. They want to believe. So how do you make them believe that you can deliver on that promise? Because now it's all about you. What do you do? So with us, for instance, I make everything else easier for business owners. I make it easier to do business for businesses who have all the right ingredients, but one. And the whole thing of that has all come through this research of looking into people, talking to our clients, figuring out their pains. And then that people are going to go, oh, well, what's the missing ingredient? Oh, you make it easier. How do you do that? And once you've got people doing that, so we're on this interested section of this diagram, they're asking, what do you do? Obviously, I come back and say, oh, it's clarity. Clarity delivers that. Clarity makes you easier to notice, easier to remember, easier to be chosen. Because if you're clear, you're more easy to understand. You're more easily understood when you do your messaging, when you do your marketing. So look at Yahoo. You go to the Yahoo's page, and it's a search engine, right? But it's got mail icons and a whole load of news stuff. It's got horoscopes and weather, and we all know it's a search engine, but you get there and it's trying to be everything. And that's what most businesses look like, is sort of all things to all people. People want those things. They are the right ingredients. But to see the value of clarity, you only have to go to Google. And I know, again, it's another cliched example. But if you put the two pages, Yahoo and Google, together, you can see the power. Google's homepage is so clear. We all know it. It just is a search bar. Google do news. They do mail. They do all those things that Yahoo does, but they don't make a fuss about it, because the thing that they know is search. And the reason really that people remember Google, and the reason that they say, I'll Google it and not I'll Yahoo it, it's not because they do search really, really well, which they might do. It's because they're really, really clear on how they help you, on what they do for you. So at that stage in interest in us, if you can get someone, you've made them that promise, and they come to you, and then you can clearly state exactly how you're going to deliver on that promise. Again, like we said, you've delivered that trust, you've started that familiarity with them, you've got that bond. The next stage is this idea of, it goes back to them. Well, okay, I give you 10 grand. What do I get? And again, this movement of brand is every stage along, you know how to answer these questions, because you then know. And with us, it's like, well, you get a practical difference. You get a brand clear toolkit. You get the ability to manage it going forwards. You get the ability to accurately brief people on your future plans when you work with agencies. And then we can also try and find statistics that back those things up. It's about effectiveness, right? So we go out and we find stats and results that demonstrate effectiveness, that demonstrate the rational value, the real kind of impact that we make and that you can make as a brand going forwards after brand clear. We don't have to worry about stats that don't replicate that because we're not having that conversation. So, you know, I'm sort of just talking all over the place, but it's this idea of brand is both the beginnings of the conversation that you have with someone, as well as the way in which you understand how to keep them along that conversation. And then when you get to this bit, they're deciding on you. You know, it's back to us now. Why should I choose you? Why now? Why not in 6 months' time? And that's when, to use Seth Godin's sort of way of looking at it, you start ramping up the tension. You start creating tension. And you've got people through this process of talking about your brand, understanding your value, understanding that you're the one that they want because you've made a promise that really means something to them. And then you start turning the screw a little bit, you know, not to be mercenary about it, but and say,
I find hardest that.
Yeah, but it's things like you say, well, because, I mean, obviously the easiest things is, well, there's an offer on and it's only available for 6 months. You know, that's highlighting tension. You have to make this decision now. But you could just as easily start using it, and like we do, is the fact that, well, a brand takes 2 to 3 years to really have an impact. So studies have shown, there's these guys called Les Binet and Peter Field, amazing researchers that have basically shown that the impact of brand takes a lot longer, but ultimately has a huge increase, like upwards, straight upwards, on your ability to activate sales. So if you continue along on just looking at sales, just looking at short-term results, you have spikes when you do a campaign and then it goes back to rest. You spike when you do a campaign, it goes back to rest. If you focus on brand building, after about 2 or 3 years of really putting that message out there, because again, it's got to be consistent, which means you've got to repeat it again and again and again. After about 2 or 3 years, what happens is that the peak of your campaign success gets higher because the brand awareness drags it up. Yeah. And the trough of the gaps between campaigns gets higher as well. So it's like a stock price rising. You know, you get higher highs and higher lows. And you just have more of a flow upwards because you raise that brand perception so much that even when you're not going out there and actually activating people, you know, to buy, the brand itself becomes a level of tension. You know, do you have the new Nikes? Do you have the latest iPod? Do you have the upgraded NVIDIA video card? You know, those brand perceptions become a reason to buy the brand as well. And so with us, when it comes to tension, it's about, well, you know, if you don't do it today, you're already behind. And it's like that that adage, you know, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago or today.
Or today, yeah.
And it's about that raising that awareness that it's going to take time. You can't just expect results in 6 months. You might see something, but you can't expect real results from brand building in 6 months. But if you do it in 6 months, you'll already be 6 months behind.
That's right. Yeah.
So
there's Simon Williams, who was an action coach, and I was part of his group for a year or two. Basically, it came to this tension point, and I was struggling with it. And it's basically we're turning it around to the other party and saying, look, what happens if you don't do this? Yeah. Okay, and it's coming along a little bit to your brand taking a long time to develop. What happens if you don't revise the website? What happens if you don't go ahead with that marketing campaign? Is that going to be a problem for you? Are you going to lose out on potential sales? And you start going back to the pain again. Yeah. And that can create, because you're not having to put in artificial tension. You're just going back to the original reason they came to you and saying, well, if you didn't do it, are you going to be impacted? And if you aren't, then why we, you know. Yeah.
Well, it's that promise again.
Why are you doing this? It could be a good way to really identify whether they are keen to go ahead with it. Because if they're still not keen at that point, then maybe they should walk away and everyone's happy that way.
And the goal here is that really there should be a contract between your marketing activity and your sales activity, so that, you know, we're talking about sales now, the highlight of the tension thing, but ultimately you should never make a promise that doesn't make it easier to sell your product or service. You should never have a reason that that promise is valid that doesn't make it easier to sell it in the end. And you should only use the sort of rational reasons, the things that matter to people that make it easier to sell it ultimately. You know, so if you've got down that the brand essentially should be your way of getting rid of all of those people, filtering out all those people who don't care about the promise you're making, who don't care about the value that you bring, because they're not going to be good clients anyway. So this is why we talk about brand making.
Yeah, and they might drag you down.
Exactly. Yeah. And, you know, that's why we talk about brand making everything easier, because if you have a clear brand, you are going to put people off. And that's a good thing. You are going to upset people. You are going to turn people away. People are going to feel like you're letting them down. People are going to feel like you're not for them. And that's what you want. Yeah. Because if some people think they're not for me and they get angry about it, whatever, you know, that's their problem. It means that some people will think, oh my God, thank God, these are the ones for me.
Yeah, you're right.
That's the goal of brand.
And, you know, it even comes down to things just like writing an email or communication with a client. And certainly in my earlier days, I would be overly formal. That's not me. I want to be, you know, using emoticons or emojis where necessary, using informal but professional language. And I find myself, if I find myself not doing that, I'll backtrack and say, look, if they don't like me, it's not going to click anyway. There's no point trying to pretend I'm something I'm not. So actually that does bring me back to where I should be. And it's like, well, I want a long-term relationship, so I'd rather not work with them if they don't appreciate the sort of informality of the language.
Exactly.
And that flows through everything. You know,
and that's how your brand should function, is to get you to that place where you're attracting the right people. So, I mean, if you go through the slides, I know we've only got sort of 9 minutes left, but we haven't talked about if you keep going, sorry, to the other way, to the podcast we were going to talk about that I invited you along to.
Yes, you interviewed me.
Yeah. So this idea basically came from what we've just seen, this idea of BrandClear being about making things easier. So the whole point of the podcast is to make it easier to gain knowledge from people who've been there. So I spoke to you about, we talked about client management, didn't we? And that's an issue.
Past client, which you didn't get on with.
And that's an issue that entrepreneurs...
It's no one watching, by the way.
No. But it's a problem that entrepreneurs, business owners encounter all the time. And what I noticed was that there is no podcast out there, or at least I didn't see any podcast out there, that spoke to real business owners, so people running small and medium-sized businesses, about real business problems. So not talking to Apple about how they launched their multi-million-dollar, you know, omni-channel campaign, because that means nothing to you and I, but about how do you deal with your first sales call? How do you deal with firing a client? How do you deal with setting a good contract for a client? How do you run an effective boardroom meeting? And so the whole point of the Imperfect Brand podcast fit within We Make Things Easier, because it was making stuff easier, because it's making it easier for entrepreneurs and business owners and people like that to learn from the experiences and the failures of other people. And then it's clarity, because then they can understand that there's a lesson there to be learned and they can apply it to their own life. And then what matters to them is that they can take that and make a practical difference in their life going forward. So they've learned something through that podcast, hopefully, that they can take and actually activate in their lives. And so even though it's called the Imperfect Brand, I've only got BrandClear at the bottom there. I don't really talk about BrandClear on the podcast. It's driven by our brand promise, by our brand purpose. And to bring it full circle, the whole point, you were talking about a brand is what people make of it. A brand is what people think. And I was talking about how that's not a passive role for you. It's an active role. Because ultimately it's about associations. Your goal as a business is to build the associations in people's minds that you want them to have when they have a pain that is relevant to you. So some people go, oh, I need to search something on the internet, Google, because they've associated themselves so closely with the need to search that most people don't even think of anybody else. And with us, the idea is, you know, when people are like, oh God, it's so difficult to get anything done here, I want to make this business easier, BrandClear. I've built the association over long periods of time. This is why brand awareness takes so long, because you're talking to people who won't necessarily need you immediately. Whereas obviously with so many marketing messages, people are going out, do it now, you want this now. But brand is really about seeing that marketing is as much talking to the mass market people who might never need you, but who 1 in every 100 might one day need you. to make it easier when you do those marketing messages of do it now, somebody's already been primed.
Absolutely, yes. You're not doing all the work in that last conversation. They've led up to that.
It just makes it easier.
It does. Just a few questions. I just want to dive into some aspects of detail.
Yeah.
Do you get customers involved in this process? Because at the moment we've talked a lot about how the business owner, maybe your guidance, you're getting them to think about the elements of that triangle. If we just go back to that. So the elements of here, and then going through this process. Do you also get customers involved? Because I do find customers are what keep that brand alive. How do you get them involved? And
well, you can do. You can do it. I mean, certainly customer insight is just gold dust. You know, if you can get, like last year, I spent some time interviewing some clients of ours and just saying, okay, what problem were you trying to solve when you landed upon us? What convinced you to go with us? One of the things they kept saying was that you listened. People listened. When we talked to BrandClear, you really listened to what we needed. And I got a bit stuck on that because I was like, how do you represent that? People aren't going around going, oh, if only somebody listened to me. But listening is also key to making things easier, because if I listen to a business and their pains, I know what to make easier. So that's where that kind of came from. So you definitely need to talk to your previous clients and to understand why they chose you, because that gives you a much more solid idea of where you should be doubling down. So as soon as I got to this idea, and some people were saying about it making things easier, it's easier to do this, easier to do an interview, easier to decide at a boardroom about this, that, and the other. Oh, easier. That came from the clients. There's a great copywriting quote, which is, you know, you should never write copy. You should steal it from your customers, because they're the ones using the expressions. And if you use their language, again, familiarity and trust, you're already on there. So you have to speak to your existing clients, speak to the people you've worked with for the last 6 months, try and get their stories out of them. The other way of doing it, I've been sending stuff out into LinkedIn and just saying, tell me what you think about this. I've been trying for ages to boil down what BrandClear is, and I've only just done it. Again, after 12 months, we are the IKEA of business and brand strategy. We do flat pack business and brand strategy, because we do all the preparation, we get it all into the right box, we give you the instructions, and then you go out and you assemble it, you put it into effect. And once you've got something like that, you can actually, you know, you have an easy way of introducing yourself, but you only get there by introducing your business again and again and getting it wrong again and again. And that's again where the imperfect brand came from, was this idea that you've got to keep failing in the right direction to get anywhere. And you can't fail as a business in a real environment unless you go out and actually talk to real people who might need your services. Yeah. So as well as talking to clients, I was reaching out. It actually gave me a reason to do cold outreach, which was reaching out to people and saying, I'm trying to understand businesses. I can't get to people because of the pandemic. Would you give me half an hour of your time? Not selling. All I want to do is listen to your problems, come up with a couple of ideas, and you'll help me understand the challenges that businesses have. And then, you know, the other way was really the podcast. I came up with the idea of the podcast for all these reasons I've talked about, but also because it gave me a reason to talk to people I wanted to talk to. So there's a couple of businesses that I've contacted about the podcast, which I've got through to the CEO within 2 phone calls that never would have happened if I hadn't been able to sell them an idea of something that was good for them.
It's a great idea. And it seems like a trick, but it's not. You go in with a genuine offer.
Yeah, and it's good for me.
Worst case, you get an interview and you learn something about them. Best case, you get a meaningful conversation that could turn into a sale. So I mean, it's a great idea.
I'm pitching to somebody next week that was a podcast guest. And the other thing that you get to do is, so in my podcast, and I did with you, the second question I always ask is, what's the biggest challenge you're facing right now? So then I get 20 minutes with someone, 15 minutes with someone, and they're telling me about their problem. Yeah. And so all I do is soak it up and listen and say, okay, well, actually, businesses try and solve problems this way, not in the way I thought. Everybody thinks that everybody sits down and goes, oh, Google, how do I improve customer retention? Nobody does that. They talk to their friends. They talk to other people. There's so many ways that people do it, and there's not just one answer, but you'll never know until you go out and you actually speak to people in the real world.
Yeah. I just want to, just to finish off, one quick question here. If you're IKEA, what are your meatballs?
What, my meatballs?
Because people go to IKEA not just for the flat pack, but they go for the meatballs, you know, or it's a bonus. It's a critical non-essential. It's something they get. Oh, I like the coffee because it's free because I've got a family card, or I get the, do you have that? Because I think that is really important.
I think it's these tools. So when I have a conversation with someone, like I was saying, ringing them up and asking them for a bit of research, one of the things I offer is I'll go through this tool with you. I've just done a video actually that I'm going to put out on LinkedIn saying to people, look, give me half an hour of your time. I'll build you one of these tools in half an hour because I now have a great process for doing it. And it will enable you to go ahead and do something more consistently. Completely free. The only thing I ask whenever I do it is, if I do a tool for you, would you please share the template tool with 5 other people you know, and just tell them if it's helped you, and just share it out. And for me,
it's a really good idea. So you're encouraging that referral, before they're even clients. Nice.
Surface area, you know, that's my goal this year. As much surface area.
I might steal some of that.
As possible. Do it, but that's why I'm doing this. Is, you know, these ideas make it easier to do business, because ultimately I'm not a great salesperson. I don't enjoy it. But now I've got a reason to talk to people. I've got a reason to ask them questions, and ultimately I've got something to offer to them. And it just builds a better conversation. It makes everything easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. I just mentioned the podcast again. So obviously you listen to the last one. That's a great, it's your episode 5, or the latest one up there. You get a little bit of an insight into when we started, and it's very, very frustrating, I'll call them, client. Plus some of the challenge we've got with the club in terms of growing the numbers. So that might be an insight for some people. Benjamin, do you want to say where people should go and find out about you? Yeah,
fantastic. So just www.brandclear.co.uk. That's our website, of course. And then I'm just Benjamin Catley-Richardson on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect with anybody. And like I say, I am happy to offer half an hour of my time to go through this tool and talk to you about how you can fit your elements into it. I'd love to do it. It's the reason I do it. It's so much fun to do. I really enjoy doing it. And again, the only thing I ask is that you would then share the idea of the tool with 5 other people. And if they wanted to have it done for them, they could send them my way.
Do you give them a framework to share it? You know, because sometimes you might not know how to, I've got to write the text. I've got to, you know, maybe if you can give them a framework to share and say, well, you're not sure, just copy and paste this text and you're done.
You know what works with that is that, again, I know that that's something to do because it makes life easier.
Yeah.
So everything, I mean,
we're all lazy. We're all lazy.
Yeah,
and it's
exactly.
it's not a bad thing. That's just how a lot of us operate.
I spoke to somebody recently about my LinkedIn posts, and he was saying, you do a lot of text. And I was like, oh God, yeah, I'm supposed to be making things easier for people. So I ought to do shorter ones. So I've been doing much shorter ones because they're easier. And again, it's just brand should dictate, or dictate is the wrong word, but brand should guide everything you do, so that everything you do builds an association that you want.
Lovely, thank you. Well, so hopefully everyone, there's a lot of useful things in there actually, and maybe pick some element of that to commit to going forward with. Maybe even it's just a conversation with Benjamin to find out whether there's something that you can do there. But I certainly think it's worth just taking some time to think about. For me, it kind of comes down to your customers' goals and how your product or service fits in with that. Can be quite a simple thing you can do. It's not a brand, but it's just a simple way of moving that along a little bit further. We certainly haven't got any time for Q&A, but never do. I actually, I'm going to do a separate Q&A, I think, as a separate session, because I think it's the only way we'll actually get it to work.
Yeah, happy to come back for that.
Yeah, it's something I will be starting based on another conversation, which we're not going to go into. So if you love this, do tell your friends. The podcast and newsletter are completely free to join. You can just go to ratherinventive.com/club. And they can sign up there, or you can sign them up if with their permission. And if they like it, then they can sign up for £25 a month ex VAT. Thank you very much. I've actually changed the Christmas tree to a thumbs up now. I think that Christmas tree has stayed on for the last 5 months. The next club session is on the 22nd of June at 1 p.m. Thank you, Benjamin, and thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.